Our next speaker has lived in Shanghai, Chengdu, and Tianjin for 7 years and has had 2 decades of experience in the real estate markets in Southeast Asia and China. Ms Mireille Wan served as the Managing Director of CBRE Tianjin and has helped secure the sole leasing mandate of commercial properties in the Sino-Singapore Tianjin eco-city.
Ms. Wan has worked with public and private sectors, with developer firms, international property brokerages, MNCs, large domestic companies, and ultra-high net worth individuals. Her professional accreditations are with the Urban Land Institute and the Singapore Institute of Surveyors and Valuers. She is here today to share with us the challenges of real estate consultants working in China. Ms. Wan, please.
Morning. 大家早上好. I'm Mireille, and I'm here to represent the Urban Land Institute, where I'm a member of the institute for the past few years. And when I was asked by Ms. Pauline Oh, who's the SVP of Urban Land Institute, as to whether I would like to share my experience, I said yes, why not? But little did I realize that for this today's platform, I'm very excited to crystallize, hopefully, my 7.5 years of my time spent with CBRE China, where I first landed in Shanghai in 2005, and then I went on to Chengdu. In Chengdu, I was also in charge of the Chongqing, Yunnan, or where Kunming is the capital city, Xi'an also. And then, of course, at that time, my boss said, well, if there's anything in Xinjiang or Tibet, off you go and get your projects, right? But again, due to the lack of projects in Xinjiang and Tibet, I managed to get quite good traction in the southwestern part of China. And then from there, I went off to CBRE Tianjin. So then I hope to share with you my professional as well as some of my personal insights of my experience, particularly in Shanghai, where I'll be talking about the Dongtan Island or Chongming Island, where Dongtan feasibility study was done by CBRE. And then, of course, I know Chongqing landscape well enough before I venture into Tianjin eco-city. Right, so this is just a very simple framework, just to ensure that I can finish my sharing in 20 minutes flat. Okay, so now the first part is eco-cities in China, right? So north, south, east, west. If you look at this picture, it's very, very interesting that the clustering of trees, which signify or symbolize the eco-cities, are in the, along the coast, especially in the northern part of China, straddling a bit on the east coast, where, of course, the Chongming Island, of which Dongtan is part of it. And then, of course, you also have some in the middle of China, like Changsha, southwestern China. You have your Yunnan as well as your Chongqing, Yuelai Shengtaicheng, before you go down to Guangxi in the south. So, okay, from here, it's just a snapshot. I didn't capture all the eco-cities on the previous page, but just enough to share that on the right part of it, right part of the slide, there are about, I don't know, some of the 8 eco-cities that received the central government funding, one of which is actually the Tianjin eco-city. Now, I won't go into some of the other pointers because I think Mr. Lim and also Prof. Chen have shared some of these observations, but I think my value add today would be, in addition to what they have shared as a developer or master planner, as well as an academician, I'm here to also share my experience as a practitioner, more importantly, that of a consultant in real estate with CBRE. So we go straight to some of the challenges that I faced. Some of these eco-city nomenclature is actually very, very gimmicky, right? Because in China, developers want to distinguish their residential projects from one another. So in the past, it would be the term international, 国际, right? So if your residential project has blah, 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 国际社区 international community, then the developer thinks that his or her project will be able to command a higher price and therefore sell better amongst the competitive landscape. So then again, there's nothing equal about it. It's just part of the naming rights of the development. Of course, we also talked about employment, right? Opportunities. So again, by having this kind of eco-city, how do you actually instill or imbue the locals with the technical know-how, as well as going into the innovative R&D industries, which again, some of them may not have the wherewithal if they've not been to the higher educational institutes of learning. And also developers, right, sometimes use this eco-city tagline to entice the local government to sell the land to them, right? Because essentially everywhere in China or in the world, land is very, very restricted, or it's a limited resource. So then again, if a developer, just to build on his land bank, wants to desperately pitch for another project, then he will use this eco-city term to just entice the local government to sell the land to him. But of course, as a developer, sometimes whether you're a developer of a residential project or you're a master developer, like in the likes of Keppel Land for Tianjin Eco-City, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize water, energy, your waste, or even your air quality, right? And then, of course, some of these developers may just have sporadic tie-ups with the international firms that will provide the hardware and the software. Then again, because of the fiscal policy that Prof. Chen had mentioned just now, sometimes the local government doesn't even have enough money to fund or to co-fund the development such that it actually lives out to its name as an eco-friendly development. Again, close coordination between the eco-city, which I'll come to it later in the Tianjin aspect. There should be closer coordination between the eco-city and the relevant government agencies in order to realize the environmental targets as well as benchmarking, right? So again, I think the Tianjin Eco-City is a very, very good example whereby you have your KPIs, you have to benchmark what your development is all about, because it's not going to be a wishy-washy kind of a development where you don't even know whether the water, if they say, yes, we have the filtration system, what kind of quality are we looking into, okay? Right, so then here I was in Shanghai when I first went to China in 2005. To 2006, I was in the Shanghai CBRE consulting team, and then I just walked into the job that we were, doing with ARUP, or ARUP as some of them may call it, ARUP, to look into the feasibility study of Dongtan. At that time, it was an 84 square kilometer project. So again, just to give you some close-ups of where Dongtan is in the scheme of things. Dongtan, if you see on this right side of the picture, it's actually just at the tip of what I call a matchstick head, right? So it's that green part over there, but when it's blown up, then it's actually that picture on the left. Okay, so in terms of the, what do you call Dongtan part of it, it is, like I say, 84 to 85 square kilometers big. And in terms of Chongming, in terms of its length, it's about 81 kilometers long, which will be twice that of Singapore from east to west, as well as 18 kilometers wide, which would be roughly the breadth of Singapore. Now, it was planned to be the first eco-city in Shanghai, with all the zero greenhouse emission, as well as using recycled waste for energy. And it was supposed to be open in time for the World Expo in 2010. But when I went to Shanghai just to attend the World Expo, I was told prior to that it would become part of an open car park lot because the Shanghainese government was expecting a lot of visitors to the World Expo. And by that time, the bridge was built. So then they had wanted to treat it as an open car park just in case on the mainland there wasn't enough car parking space for visitors to the World Expo. So my personal anecdote, my personal feeling at that time was, oh no, this project is not going to live up to what it was supposed to be when we were doing the feasibility study back then in 2005, 2006. Okay, so then, as I mentioned, we are working with Arup, who was a consultant master planner, and the client is actually SIIC, which is the equivalent of GIC in Singapore. So in terms of the proximity of Dongtan, it's actually the third largest island of China. I think the two larger ones are Hainan as well as even Taiwan. So it is about 45-minute travel to central Shanghai, but via the road tunnel. Now, of course, this is another G2G, government-to-government collaboration, but in this case, it was between UK and the Chinese government. So then, back then in 2005, we had Prime Minister Tony Blair, and then subsequently, it was Prime Minister Gordon Brown signing the various MOUs to lend significance to this whole project on Chongming Island. So the highlighted parts in green, under this key milestones of the Dongtan project signify that part of CBRE Shanghai's input, where we actually worked very, very feverishly just to make sure that we met the various timelines that Arup had committed to the Shanghai client. So some of these things that Arup had to look into included on the left-hand side, human, environmental, health, energy, housing, communications, education, and culture. And most of these parameters had to be given a real estate spin because here we are to propose what should be that real estate input in terms of the various property sectors that would make Dongtan a livable place. So again, just a very quick organization chart to show where CBRE was in the scheme of things. So McKinsey is or was a business consultant that actually put in Arup, and then Arup, because has close relationships with CBRE in the past, so engaged us to be the real estate consultant. I think this is the meatier part where I would like to share the challenges. First of all, CBRE and particularly myself, because I was also from the local office before, we've done quite a lot of feasibility studies, but none as big as this in terms of its significance, it being the first eco-city in China. And then, of course, even my former CEO of CBRE China had to be involved simply because we were dealing with the SIIC, which I said is a very important client akin to the GIC of Singapore, and also maybe because as a British, he just had to do his national service in China. But regardless, it actually involved all the senior management in CBRE China just to service the client for this project. So we had to make sure that we were aligned, we as in CBRE back then, we were aligned with the objectives of Arup, just to make sure that whatever they have put forth, let's say in the traffic plans, whether it's 400 by 400 meters, kind of a grid line, whatever, then our various real estate components would have to be integrated into their business plan. So lots of meetings, and just to make sure that all the key stakeholders were on the same page so that there wouldn't be any miscommunication. Now, Dongtan was actually an eco-city, and then the whole of Chongming Island was rural. So to us, as a real estate consultant, the first step in doing a feasibility study is what is your positioning, or how do you position that real estate project? Do you brand it as just like any other eco-cities in the rest of the world? Because as a gentle reminder, eco-city started a long time ago in other parts of the world. But what is that key essence, what is your branding message in order to position Dongtan as one of its kind in China? So should it be high-end residential development? Should it have gleaming international grade A offices? Should it have spanking new malls? You know, what is it? Do you need like 6-star hotels? And so forth, right? So you have to be very, very clear in how you want to position it, and then from there, all your various property sectors, you know, to target the demand, whether it's local demand or foreign demand, will come into play. Now, where was the demand going to come from? Because prior to the building of the tunnel or the bridge, Chongming Island was just isolated. You could take a boat there, which I understood was like maybe under 2 hours just to get from Pudong to Chongming Island. So then again, how would you be able to overcome this infrastructural hindrance? You know, so and then the existing residents mostly were rural people. They did not have very high purchasing power. And back then, as part of the discussion, someone suggested in our group that maybe for the residential portion, we target that as a weekend home for mainland Shanghai people. But again, if you target it as a weekend home, just like what we see on Sentosa Cove, where it's an investor's getaway, but how do you sustain that level of consumer demand or even that lively environment throughout the course of the week? Because definitely you can't just have a part of an island that comes alive maybe starting Friday and then ending on a Sunday, right? So then again, what is the appropriate gross floor area for the whole development out of the 84 square kilometers? Because we cannot build you know, to the maximum of the 84 square kilometers. Definitely, you know, 70%, maybe close to 70% of that is actually set aside for the wetlands, the eco-sanctuaries, and infrastructural facilities as well. So then, well, this screen is a bit high. Yes, how do you then balance, right? Because here you have this, you know, a very special wildlife eco-sanctuary that plays out before you. How do you then make sure that whatever you're proposing, which will be implemented in the form of real estate integrated development, how will it not affect the eco-sanctuary, the wildlife population on the island? So then again, how do you cost this into your feasibility study? So you have to do a detailed cost-benefit analysis. And then we also had to do detailed surveys, focus group surveys with the target audience on mainland Shanghai, right? Because if you want officers or companies to go there, or if you want the senior management people, not necessarily just the multinational firms, but also the local firms to, you know, I mean, they have the financial means to buy properties. So then we had to do most of these surveys on mainland Shanghai. But again, not many Shanghainese or not many Chinese have actually gone or even heard of Chongming Island or even Dongtan for that matter. So then it was quite funny when we had to design picture cards, you know, just to show the concept plans of Chongming Island, Dongtan now and then later, to use as a means of communication. Again, you know, so it's really up to your own creativity just to get that message across. And then the other startling thing that I felt was we were told not to touch the locals in terms of approaching them for our surveys, right? And if some of you had read other texts in the internet, and that's because the SIIC client didn't want to alarm the local people that, hey, there's something coming up in your backyard. Maybe because this project is, you know, something new, something innovative, government didn't want to disturb the locals. But then again, this was where it was a limitation that also impacted our feasibility study. So then, with a dire lack of comparable properties, like I painted a very broad brush of Chongming Island, no other high-end residential developments, no villas, no international grade A office like what you would be familiar with in your CBD. Where are you going to get your comparable analysis from as a valuer, even as a consultant? How are you going to pitch your project to say that, right, when this is built, my grade A office should fetch maybe like 20, in China they use RMB, so RMB like 150 per square meters, per month, that would be the rental on the higher end. But all these are the indicators that are very, very vital for our proposed development, for which we could not actually have a very realistic picture simply because there was no comparable property on the island itself, much less in Dongtan segment. And then, of course, you know, as part of, this is not really on CBRE's part, but also when it came to proposing infrastructural development, you have to ship, right? So just now I said that even for people, you have to take the boat. So then you have to ship your construction materials across to the island. Again, how much cost will this add up to your cash flow? And typically as a consultant, we would, for a mixed-use development, we would do a 10-year cash flow analysis. So you have your revenue and your expenses, and then maybe, you know, first 3 years of construction, you may not have enough revenue, so it's all red colored numbers, but then subsequently the financial position should turn around in year 4 or from year 4 onwards. But then again, that's a typical mixed-use development in China, where we would adopt a 10-year cash flow. But for this humongous kind of a development, certainly a 10-year cash flow period did not do justice. When, you know, most of these developments, like what Mr. Lim said, may take 30 years, 50 years, or even a century to fully realize its potential. Now, some of these factors that caused the, downfall of Dongtan, I think, you know, it was quite unfortunate that the Shanghai party secretary is the main boss, so the mayor is number 2, but the Shuji was implicated in a corruption scandal, and he's still, I think, in prison to serve out an 18-year imprisonment. But again, sometimes, you know, whether there was miscommunication between the UK and the Chinese side, such that, don't know, both sides thought that the other party was just picking up the tab. Again, it's very, very important to have this kind of clear understanding of who's going to pick up the tab. Is it going Dutch, like you would go Dutch sometimes on outings with your friends, or is it my turn to pick up the tab? But whatever it is, this was one of the factors cited by one of the authors that, you know, pointed to this unclear status of who was going to pick up the tab and take the glory of the success of Dongtan. And of course, you know, now farmland is valuable resource, right? So I do know that some of the institutional investors are investing in farms in Australia, New Zealand, and of course you would have read the newspapers that even the Chinese are investing in the vineyards in some parts of Europe. So again, you know, or does it mean that if it's farmland, it's zero land cost, it's cheap, it should be developed? I think my answer is not necessarily so, because we still need that farmland to balance up the ecosystem, right? So again, some of these factors had, you know, led to the downfall of Dongtan. So it was an interesting exercise because when it came to 2006, I volunteered myself to go to CBRE Chengdu, and by that time, within a span of 9 months, I will say from the time I started on the Dongtan project until I left for CBRE Chengdu, the project kind of fizzled out. So then again, you know, it was very, very supersonic speed in the first few months, and then after that, it just died a bit of a tragic death, not even a slow death, which was quite a waste, because if this had succeeded, Dongtan is actually a very, very, what do you call that? It's a very pristine environment, and for the Chinese government to be able to execute such a remarkable development ahead of the 2010 World Expo, I think that would have been something worth trumpeting to the world. But anyway, now based on some of my recent research, some local developers like CITIC have developed some of the residential developments, but according to the prices of some of these apartments, they're going for RMB 5,000 to about 7,000 per square meters on the island itself. And generally speaking, 5,000 to 7,000 per square meter RMB for residential sector is on the lower end of the spectrum, because especially in Shanghai, you have very, very luxury apartments going for above 150,000 per square meters. So again, this is just to point out that relativity. Okay, then I went on to Tianjin, where, how should I put it? It was an exciting trip. I wanted to be based there because I thought, given the presence of the eco-city, where there would be the Singapore presence, I would like to be in that action. But of course, as CBRE, we offered, or we still offer, or they still do offer a whole host of services: research, valuation, leasing services, whether it is office, industrial, retail, property management, etc. So anyway, so off I went to Tianjin. And then this is, I used to live in the city center, which on the right side is, number 1. And that is like a good, well, 40 kilometers away from the eco-city. So just to add on to what Mr. Lim had shared just now, I don't want to go into some of the common well-known factors, but just to say that it was a chore. And actually, Mr. Lim was my client, so here I was the consultant and he was on the developer's side. It was a chore going out all the way, traveling like 40 kilometers each direction for meetings or even for site inspections when we had clients to show them around. And it would take like practically half of my day because I would be in the car like 3 hours up and down, and then maybe another 1 to 1.5 hours of meeting time. So I just want to say that much as it was non-arable, it was mission impossible, yet there were some of these factors that maybe have contributed to a slower development for the eco-city, but I always believe very, very strongly that slow and steady wins the race rather than rushing for the finishing line, unlike last night's F1 race, okay? So most of the development timelines are, like by now 2020, simply because China operates in a very short time frame. So from next year onwards, it's going to embark on its 13th 5-year plan, 13五规划, as they call it. So as it is, some details have already been announced. So you could find these details on the website. So again, the 13th 5-year plan is from 2016 to 2020, right? And then when this eco-city was planned, like what Mr. Lim said, started off in 2008, and then aims to finish by 2020, where all the KPIs, the population numbers must all play out. So again, whether this is viable or not, I personally think that it's just all too rushed. Okay, I think I'm like running short of time, but I've highlighted some of these indicators, 22 quantitative indicators, simply because I feel very, very passionately about the potable water. Very commendable, that in Tianjin, this is the only place probably, I could also bet my bottom dollar on it, that you can just turn on the tap and drink water, which we used to, and which we take for granted coming from whichever parts of the world you're from. For me, just to share a joke, we all drank from the 18.9 dispensers, water dispensers. They call it in Chinese as 桶装水, right? So you go to the water dispenser, 18.9 liters. So we're so used to drinking from that source of water in the office or even at home. Of course, some of us, the conservative ones, will even boil the water before we drink. Others, because they have the hot and the cold water taps, it's like, nah, it's all right. You just, well, as long as it comes up from the hot water spout, it's already heated up and the bacteria have all been killed. But there was this occasion when this water dispenser company guy came to my apartment to exchange 2 empty tumblers with 2 filled up ones. And I gave him the money, 20 kwai, which is 2 10 RMB bills. And this guy was quite lazy. He had a money pouch on his waist, but he was holding my 2 empty tumblers, right? And he just shoved in the money through the tumbler. I was thinking, oh my goodness, is he going to rinse the tumbler before the next consumer uses it? Or else is he just going to, like, you know, tip the thing over back in his factory, make sure the money comes out and goes into his pocket? But such is the sacrifice that, or inconvenience that we had to put up with in terms of not having potable water. So again, you know, I was very, very happy, of course, as a Singaporean, very proud that at this project of ours, we could actually claim 100% potable water as one of the quantitative KPIs. And then, of course, you know, 0 loss to the natural wetlands, and then the ambient air quality. In China, most of the green lungs are actually temporary parks, because some of these parks have blatant signages to say that these are temporal parks, just waiting for developers to buy the land. So there are very, very few trees and a lot of desertification. That's why in the past there would be sandstorms and all that. But in China, every day I have to dust the heels of my shoes after, you know, or at the end of the day. But over here, I don't have to do it. But also speaking on a more personal level, I came back in 2013 after 7.5 years of being away simply because of the air pollution in Tianjin. So again, to have a place which some of you may call utopia, you know, to have all these qualities, I think it is a very, very amazing place to be in. So as a consultant, we worked in parallel, or we complemented some of these schemes that EcoCity has put in place. So for example, the assistance plans, you know, where you could get some concessions or subsidies, especially all these are targeted at Singapore companies, where if you want to actually do feasibility studies, or if you want to fly up there, etc., you are able to get concessions from the government. But still, yeah, so all these are the market feasibility studies, where again you could get some subsidies from the Singapore government. And on the right side will be some of these companies that have already successfully been registered in Tianjin EcoCity. So then again, as a CBRE leasing agency, we were given the sole leasing agency for the landmark office building, the ready-built RBOs, as we call them, ready-built offices, which are more like your science park, Ascendus kind of offices, as well as, okay, this is the eco-industrial park, but I just want to say that the next slide actually dwells on the ready-built factories, and the ready-built factories are right at the top over there. So again, you know, most of us are familiar with the Tai Hong Qiao, the Rainbow Bridge, which actually is from here. But from here, the starting point, so just now, as I mentioned, right, to take clients to view the project from city center, it's like 3 ways up and down. And then from the southern tip to the most northern tip, it took us another like 20 to 30 minutes by car on very, very good roads just to get to the ready-built factories. So again, the ready-built factory will be, you know, like the JTC, Jurong Town Corporation kind of factories that we have in Singapore. So now, what were some of these challenges? We had to leverage on the global platform because CBRE is a Fortune 500 real estate consultant and brokerage firm, just to get approach clients, whether it is multinationals or even in China itself, the local Chinese companies, just to ascertain, what is the kind of demand. And because this is a very specialized industry, we're talking about things eco, right? So it's not like finance, insurance, construction, whatever. So the percentage of these companies globally is very small. And whether they were willing to contemplate coming all the way to China, to Tianjin, and much more or much less eco-city. So even incentives were not enough to lure them out there. Location really, and these are just objective comments, out in the boondocks, all right? Lack of connectivity with upstream, downstream business partners, simply because it is just an isolated eco-city in that part of Tianjin, in that part of China. Lack of public transport facilities, because as a startup area for 8 square kilometers, definitely not all the public transportation is like running up and down every 10 minutes, like what you experience here. Sometimes you just wait for the train 1 minute long and you complain. But again, it's a very nascent development. So again, the accessibility was not that fantastic. Sporadic taxis. Most of these were the Heiche. Heiche means your private cab drivers, like your Uber, or, and they would charge you without any meter. So it's either, well, you're at their mercy, literally, because if you don't want to hop into their cab, you're just stranded out there. So some of these are the practical inconveniences for now, whether as a resident or as an employee. And then employers need to think, where am I going to house my employees? Because I can't bus them up and down, maybe 1 hour each day. Is there enough housing accommodation over there just to make sure that the employees are happy? Also to look into their commercial or retail needs. Again, no shopping center of that scale has been developed. So you have all these shoplets, but it doesn't provide a very thriving kind of retail atmosphere. Rentals, naturally with eco standards in your building materials, the rental that you charge will be higher than a typical ready-built office or even ready-built factory or even a typical international grade A office. But then again, there were subsidies provided to offset or even like rent-free periods that were given to the tenants, okay? The stakeholders, it was very interesting because as a middle person, so we were dealing with, of course we were appointed by SSTC, and then we also had to make sure that our activities were also complementing the Chinese side. But sometimes we just felt that there were some duplicated or duplications in terms of the activities, who they were approaching. It seems like a bit of internal competition, right? Excuse me. But ultimately, what we see today with 2,300 firms being registered is a remarkable achievement. And lastly, as a CBRE itself, I had to tell my department head, how are we going to do this from the city center? Because we cannot do remote control, otherwise this whole project will fail because we're the sole leasing agent. So then again, we had to make that choice to even persuade our staff to go there, be based in Eco-City every other day as a compromise, as a solution. Because for her to be traveling up and down, like I say, 3 hours each time there's a client doesn't make sense. So then again, to base her in the office in SSTEC, it's not like you go to work and face your usual colleagues, right? So it's a different environment. It's quite tough to even recruit agents just to service our client. So then I just want to say that, in terms of the 2,300 companies that have been registered as at to date, just on the practical level, not all the 2,300 companies would have bodies working or even living in the Eco-City itself. Because if you know the, again, behind the scenes, some companies registered, but that's because they want to enjoy all the incentives, all the whatever subsidies that they have, and they don't have people on site, maybe just yet, okay? So then again, this is one of the loopholes which I think should be closed in on. So that's why you may not see enough people on the ground. But whatever it is, it's again a very remarkable city or project, because this is where foreign currencies, especially between RMB and Singapore, the loans can be taken out from the banks here. This is very, very important when you operate overseas, because as a Singapore or even American company, you want to repatriate your funds, right? But under the stringent currency exchange policies, if you don't have a bilateral agreement at that higher level, your money will be stuck in China. So to have this opening in the financial part of this eco-city development is also very, very key to its success. I think, yes, that's all I have to share with you. So thank you so much for your attention.